Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, 10 Habits of a Peacemaker, being right versus making a difference. The First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. It's meant to protect our freedom. On this show, I sit down with Stephen T. Collis. Stephen is a law professor at the University of Texas, Austin. He's a former research fellow at Stanford Law School and is the founding faculty director at the Bech-Loughlin First Amendment Center and is one of the nation's leading thought leaders on the First Amendment and civil discourse. When there are issues and conflict around the First Amendment rights, Stephen is one of the first people called in by our nation. He recently wrote a book, and the title itself reveals something profound to me. The title of the book is Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. What does it say about how our culture is treating the First Amendment and the things that we believe to be right in general, when one of its leading experts doesn't write a book about what the First Amendment is or how to follow it, but instead speaks to the heart of human conflict around people's emotions and actions and behaviors towards each other? Well, Stephen takes his expertise and platform to address what he feels is more important than legalities and rights and goes to where he feels the most hope is, the heart. Habit 1 in his book, for instance, is titled Intellectual Humility and Reframing. It starts off, this is literally the first statement. Most of us need to recognize that most of the time, we don't know what we're talking about. And it just gets better. He's really humble, really gracious, and brings up some significant points in regards to the First Amendment, but overall, just our efforts to argue what we believe is fact and true. I'm having all my kids listen to this show so we can discuss it together. I'd like everyone to hear this before the next election. And I'd recommend giving Stephen's new book. Again, it's called Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits that Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Let's give it to everyone for Christmas, or better yet, let's give it to everyone in our family before Thanksgiving and reduce the family tensions by 95%. We argue and make things worse instead of making a difference. So here's an effort to help you and me be different. Friends, when I'm not having these conversations about human potential, I'm working directly with people on their human potential, on integrating the wisdom that we hear from our world's greatest influencers on this show, and to work with your purpose. If you feel you want to enhance your human potential, pursue more clearly your purpose, I'd be honored to connect. Go to kevinmiller.co and let's talk. Here are a few sponsors who help make the show possible. Then drive with me and with Stephen T. Collis and consider 10 Habits of a Peacemaker, being right versus making a difference. Let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Stephen, your book, when I saw the title and the concept of it, I loved it. Habits of a Peacemaker. And of course, I want to think of myself as that's me. I'm a peacemaker. Though as I continued to read, I thought, okay, in truth, if I'm honest to my selfishness, I really want to be a peace receiver. I really want peace as well. But I thought, well, it seems like it's a perfect match of those. If I am a peacemaker, I will by proxy probably receive a lot more peace as well. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And, it's important to define terms, right? When I mean a peacemaker, I think there's a million ways we could define that term on a geopolitical sense, but I'm talking about in our personal lives. And for me, that's somebody who can have, productive discourse about difficult topics. And difficult topics can be anything from our things at home with our family to political topics to situations in the workplace, right? There's all sorts of situations in life where we face difficult conversations. And you're right. If you're somebody that is making peace, but also engaging in certain tactics, you're going to have much more peaceful and productive conversations coming back your way as well. And it's kind of one of these things where all ships rise together,
What I'll tell you something that came up when I read it too, Stephen, is an interview I had a while ago with Shanti Feldhahn is her name. And she has a book called The 30-Day Kindness Challenge. And her study and research is on kindness. And the big thing that stuck out from her message that I've talked about for years now is that being kind to others, who it helps most is me, whether I get reciprocation or not. And as I read your book, I thought, this is making peace in myself, whether or not I do get reciprocity for something, to act in this way, to embody the principles really that you lay out. It's kind of like, it feels like a deep breath. This gives me more peace, man. It's not, I'm not happy out there causing conflict and engaging in these polarized discussions. I mean, we're at a point now, we know culturally, of more anxiety than ever. And I feel like your book, this message, is a great medicine for today's anxiety.
Well, I hope it can be. And I love your comment about that research, because I have some of that research in the book, and I talk about how, my hope is people will want to learn how to have better dialogue, to improve their homes, to improve our democracy generally, to improve our country. But I have a line in the book where I tell them, even if you're not interested in any of those things, just do it for selfish reasons, because all the research shows that people who can have productive discourse, can treat other people with kindness, and are more, amiable in their various parts of their life in which they're involved, always have better success. So you can do it for selfish reasons. My hope is we'll all do it for more than selfish reasons, but maybe that's a good place to start and go from there.
Yeah, I tend to think most everything we do is selfish, or at least in my scenario. But maybe it can be a better evolved aspect of selfishness where I'm actually serving other people. Yeah, I look at the book and I go, well, this is a marriage book.
Right.
I would give this to any couple. This would be a great marriage gift. If anybody knows somebody getting married, get them this book as a marriage gift. I'm about to go. We were just talking about you used to live in Colorado, and I'm heading up this weekend to Denver area where I've got 4 kids, ages 18 to 25, I think, 4 kids. And I'm going to talk about this because I see them as kind of where I used to be at their age. I was a lot more certain. I was a lot more resolute on issues than I am today. And I see them, and I don't want to, challenge them necessarily, but to go, gosh, here's this guy, Stephen Collis. And, he starts off just with the showcasing of obviously, humility, and also just the reality that we know so little, and where are we basing our perspectives on. To start at a high level though, Stephen, I'm reading the book I'm always curious about the culture, which I'm a product of. I mean, I'm influenced by it as well, for better and worse. And why do you feel that we are in this place where it seems like we go out into these conversations or into a social group or in any setting with so much more of a need to convince than to learn and be a student?
Yeah. So, let me jump first to your comment about it being a marriage book, because, chapter 4 is chapter 3 is, I say, assume the best about people. It's kind of this principle that peacemakers engage in. And it's not a naive assuming the best about people. There are bad actors in the world, but generally speaking, when it's people in our lives, we want to assume they're coming from a place of good intentions. And it's interesting, your comment about marriage, because when my wife and I got married, she said, this is 24 years ago now, we've been married a long time. She said, I don't want to fight all the time. And I think it would be critical for us that anytime one of us does something, that the other one goes ahead and assumes that we're acting out of good intentions, right? So if I'm supposed to clean up the house and she comes home and I didn't get to it, she can assume that I was just being lazy and watching the game. Or she can assume that maybe something blew up with my toddler and I had a really hard time getting him into bed, or maybe there was an emergency at my work, or, whatever it might be. We have engaged in that practice our whole marriage. A lot of research supports it. And I would tell you, I think it's probably reduced 99% of the potential conflicts in our married life, just assuming the best about each other's motives when we do things. So now that said, to answer your second question, to answer your question, our whole society encourages us to do the exact opposite of that right now. And I talk about in chapter 2 of the book, how social media, how our brains reward our behavior on social media, how our smartphones work, how media works generally. All of it is geared right now to steer us into silos where they can keep us there. And most of us kind of know that conceptually, but I don't think we know just how intentional that behavior is by media generally, social media, but also traditional media. So for example, if you're interested in like the New York Times, let's say you read the New York Times homepage, most people don't know this, but if you and I go to the New York Times and spend a little bit of time there, and then we go back the next day, I will get a different New York Times homepage than you will.
That's amazing. Because
they're watching what I show interest in, and they're just giving more and more and more of it. So the social media companies are doing it, traditional news outlets are doing it. So everywhere we go, we're in these little silos, and pretty soon we just think this is the way the world works. And as we walk around, we start to think there's only three types of people, right? There's the people who agree with us, and then there are fools, and there are monsters. We can't possibly comprehend that there might be other people who have learned different information than we have, or more information than we have, because we're not being exposed to it. And the entire media milieu that we're in right now is reinforcing that. So just being aware of that is a crucial step for why we all feel like anyone who disagrees with us, we just have to argue with them. They just don't understand the world, or they're a bad actor, is kind of our assumptions.
Stephen, what you just brought up, it scares me. Honestly, I spend a little time on, I have a team that posts stuff on social media. I don't spend a lot of time. I don't want to. I try not to.
Right.
But I will go to Instagram sometimes. I get direct messages, and my kids will sometimes share things. So to engage with them, I'll see they'll message me something that they know that I am interested in or care about, and we'll talk about it and have some good discussions sometimes. However, so it brings you to the whatever it is, your wall, your main feed or whatever. And I realize that it feeds me what I want. And as you're talking, I'm sitting there thinking, how amazing would it be? How horrific would it be if I walked into my place of work or my school or wherever I go, and I that day decide to really stupidly wear, I don't know how to say something that wouldn't offend somebody, a really weird shoe, like for me, okay, I'll be sexist, pink stilettos or something like that, which would be very out of character. And the next day I go in and everybody else has pink stilettos. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm brilliant. I'm like a trendsetter.
Right.
This is awesome. And the next day I go in with an ear to ear, sideways mohawk. And the next day everybody has the same thing. And I'm thinking, I'm feeling really good about myself. That's what I'm realizing, even as of late, Stephen, that's what social media is. I go in there and I put in my interest, or as you're saying, even on a news site, and the next day it comes in and confirms, as you talk about in the book, it confirms my bias and makes me think, oh my gosh, I'm the rightest person on the planet. Apparently, everything aligns with my beliefs. And you're saying, no, that's what the machine is built to, so that you come in and they make money off of that. Well, that's a different world.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the key. They do make money off it. They profit tremendously off it. And this isn't like a conspiracy theory. It's not like they hide this. Yeah, it's business. They don't hide it. They're trying to get their users addicted. And I'm not using the word addicted loosely here or casually. I mean, literally chemically addicted to their products. And they have social media companies and smartphone companies, and also foreign actors who are trying to turn Americans against each other based on our racial and religious and political differences. They have teams of PhDs in psychology whose whole job it is to figure out how to make these apps and phones work in a way to keep us addicted to them. And they know how the chemical reward center of our brain works. And so they know if they give us these like variable rewards throughout the day, we will constantly keep turning back, and they've got us addicted to it. And the question is now, I'm aware of that, and how do we free ourselves from it?
Okay, your book, and I hope we get through as much as we can of the methodologies. I am enamored with the psychology, of this, and it feels, we've got people like Brene Brown talking about, resilience and whatnot, and yet it feels like. So I'm in my 50s, and it feels like we are more fragile than ever. We are so incredibly not resilient, not strong. And, we're in America, land of the free and home of the brave and the strong and independent. And it feels like we're more so the opposite every day, and we're offended by everything. And my interest here, again, kind of along these lines, is why are we so culturally clinging to our beliefs, which are really perceptions for the most part. But why is that? What do you look at this? Is it social media? Is it that? Is it that everything confirms us? But even there, I would think it still goes back to my own personhood. And am I confident and secure in myself, or am I insecure and threatened? Because it feels like I must be pretty insecure and threatened as a culture to be so offended by any differing belief and so unwilling to enter into it, as you so lead us to in your book, to enter into it with curiosity and the willingness to learn, instead of going in and going, no, I'm going in there to fight for what I believe in and convince everybody that it's true and right. It seems the antithesis of what we think that we're built on, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's all right. And I mean, the reality, I think some of it has to do with social media. Some of it has to do with these methods of addiction I'm talking about.
Okay.
It's easy. It is easy to just get on social media or get on websites and just scroll what is fed to us, right? It takes real work to consciously go out and choose to learn something different, something new, to learn a different perspective. One of the habits I talk about that peacemakers engage in is they hunt for the strongest arguments against their beliefs.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of work. And so you can take the path of least resistance. You don't have to do that. That leads you back to just getting spoon-fed what media and social media are giving us. And then when those companies and people who understand our psychology better than we do are actively trying to get us to do exactly that, that's a hard thing to overcome. But going back to the fragility, Jonathan Haidt and folks like him are doing a lot of great work in this space, showing the research that's showing again and again and again the damage that social media is doing to young people, but also to those of us who are older. The reality is, if you're never exposed to anything different than what you think, it's going to be pretty jarring when you finally are exposed to it. And that's why you have these kind of fight or flight responses, and you're fragile and you can't handle it. Peacemakers go out of their way to hunt for things that are different than what they believe. I don't mean silly memes on the internet that they can easily shoot down. I mean they go out of their way to hunt for the strongest arguments against their positions, and then they study them, they think about them, and then when they get exposed to them in the real world in conversations or in various environments, they don't get offended. They don't get worked up. It doesn't trigger an over-the-top emotional reaction. They have already prepared themselves for how to think about these things and how to talk about them. And so we have to kind of do that. And, that's the key here. I don't want to focus in the book, and I don't focus in the book just on what the negatives are in our society that are leading to a breakdown in productive discourse. I was speaking up in Canada a while back, and one lady who was an expert in addiction, she counsels people in, alcoholism, drug abuse, that kind of stuff. She said, one thing that we all have to remember is it's not enough to try to stop an addiction. You have to replace it with something positive. And so much of the book is about developing those habits to replace our addictions to social media and smartphones and the way that we're being manipulated by the tech of the world we're in right now.
Well, the show's called What Drives You. That's my book. And I'm even looking at myself and where my drive has in the past been so much of performance and achievement. Maybe it still is, but it's a different type of achievement. Now, instead of achieving I use the analogy of the next PR on my mountain bike ride, I want to achieve some peace. So maybe I'll stop on the mountain bike ride by the high mountain lake and breathe deep and actually bring some peace into my soul instead of just the adrenaline and the dopamine hit of the fast ride. So it's still the drive, but yeah, as you said, I need to replace it because it's still there. I still want to feel something. I still want to achieve something. I still want to grow and progress, but instead of performance, I find myself replacing it with peace. Fair enough?
Yeah, although I feel like you've got a healthy source of dopamine there in performance and wanting to do well on your bike, and that is so much more so much healthier than what we see most of society doing right now. Is just getting the same type of dopamine hit from contention on the internet and bias confirmation on the internet, right? So in your instance, I think if all we're seeking is those dopamine hits and we're not also trying to establish a sense of inner peace, that makes it hard to be a peacemaker. In chapter 9, I talk about developing inner peace, right? That peacemakers actually spend time doing this. I love that you said you'll pause to breathe and take in the scene. One of the things I talk about is it's critical to get ourselves in a state of inner peace before we get into conversations. So much of the book gives habits for how to navigate difficult conversations in the moment, things you can actually do during the conversation. But much of the book is actually more about how to get ourselves in a place in our daily life so that when the difficult conversations come, we're ready to deal with them. And this seeking inner peace is critical. Breathing techniques, mindfulness, journaling. If you're a spiritual person, a lot of research shows that spiritual practices can do a lot to help develop inner peace. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be really helpful. There's a lot of techniques people can use to develop inner peace so they're ready when conversations come and they can deal with them in a rational way.
I told you that I had a discussion with my Friday morning guys group where we do life together. And I'm talking about this because I was reading it before they got there. And one of them, they were talking about a spiritual aspect because we're all guys that originally had met in a church a long time ago. And we were talking about that and talking about having a safe place, people desiring a safe place to discuss things that they care about. One of the guys said something to the effect of, I wish we could just check our egos at the door. Now, of course, I am studying your book and I'm thinking, gosh, I want to check the motive, or like instead of the name tag to have really, I'm coming into this discussion with this motive, or even further below that, what's the emotion? And let's take it from I'll pick on religion. That's my background and go, gosh, my motive in the past would have been, I'm coming in here to protect and fight for my belief because it's completely attached to my identity. So I'm here to convince and fight for that. I'm not really here to be open. Okay, well, glad you let us know that. Would you just turn around and you're not invited? But that's kind of what we're wondering here is what, like you said, what is the motive? And what is that where you would go? There is a motive, and underneath that is an emotion. Is that the root?
Yeah. So in chapter 3, when I talk about assuming the best about people, what I discuss is how all of us have these different motivations. We have these kind of psychological, moral foundations that it's just like a gut level reaction to things. And when we meet someone with whom we disagree, we often end up arguing at a much higher level. We're talking about some topic we disagree about. And what we're going to find is there are probably multiple levels below the topic we're discussing where the actual root disagreement is. Let me give you an example of what made me think about this the most is, I'm a First Amendment scholar at the University of Texas. I do a lot of work in the religious liberty space. I was once asked to speak with a colleague of mine at a meeting, and we were talking about the outcome of a particular case. Everything about this case made me think that he should have been happy with the outcome and that I should have been happy with the outcome. And I was, but he got up and said it was the worst outcome he'd seen in like decades. And I thought, what on earth is happening here? Like, we're just talking right past each other. And what I realized is that the way he thinks the Constitution should be interpreted, he has a different philosophy for how he thinks the Constitution should be interpreted than I do. So even though the outcome of this case I would have thought he liked, it contradicted his underlying philosophy, which again, I think is driven by his underlying kind of moral psychology. So if I want to have a productive conversation with him, I can't be talking about what happened in this particular case at the top level. If I actually want to get forward, I need to go all the way down to his underlying philosophy and where we differ there. And that's where we need to be having the conversation. But we weren't having that conversation. We were just talking about this case. And it's like we were just ships passing in the night, not talking to each other, right? I felt like this particular clause of the Constitution, we should be interpreting from the standpoint of liberty. He felt like we should be interpreting it from the standpoint of equality. And we just had different views on the case. And what we needed to do was be talking about those two different ways of thinking about it at the lowest level. And we only get there by asking questions and understanding people, assuming they might have good motives, and then asking questions to understand what those motives are until we can get down to where the real disagreement lies.
Okay, let's follow that. You said the word interpretation a couple times, which is a highlight focus of my life right now on a project that I'm working on. In essence, saying that life as we know it is what we interpret, and that is at the core, I want to say, is based on our values. I want it to be based on, I want mine to be based on my values, as opposed to based on especially my negative emotions. I don't want it based on my fear, on my self-protection, whatever. So to that, does that resonate to say, I mean, here we come to the table with whatever the discussion is, whatever the issue, the topic is. then something happened. So like in this thing you said, so here's this outcome that you and this guy witnessed, and you had an expectation of that. I'm inclined these days I want to come forward to that and go, okay, so we both saw what happened. Here's the outcome. So Bob, how did you interpret that? That's what we don't do and seem to suffer from, because we expected the interpretation is the same as ours. Yes?
I think that's right. And we also you've talked about our emotions. We get driven from emotions. It's one critical skill that we can all develop is if we find ourselves in a conversation with somebody and they come at us really hot.
Triggered. Is that?
Yeah, they get triggered. It's instead of getting upset with them and arguing, trying to prove them wrong, trying to figure out why they're telling them they're unjustified in the reaction they had, far better to ask questions to understand what has happened in their life.
Yeah.
That caused that type of emotional response. And you're not asking rhetorical questions to prove them wrong or to make a point. I have a friend that I talk with on a regular basis, love him to death. There's a particular topic that I've realized he can't talk about in a rational way. And so I find myself wanting to make fact-based rational arguments back to him, but I've realized I can't do that yet. What I need to understand is, what are his life experiences that are causing him to have that kind of over-the-top emotional reaction? And I'm not judging him. We all have those topics. We all have certain topics that cause a higher emotional reaction in us that it's harder for us to process rationally. And what I need to do is understand more of his history. I think just allowing him to talk about that, explain it to me, understand the experiences he's had, will allow him to open up more. And then we'll be able to start talking more about the fact-based points I would like to make. And I'll be much more sensitive to what he's worried about if I do that. But if I just start off trying to point out where he's wrong and how he's overreacting, that conversation will go nowhere, Well,
what I like is and what I would want for myself is your awareness of his state, of where he is. And it made me think of, or caused me to think of somebody who's just gone through a trauma. Right. And yeah, here we are talking about an issue that I would like to be on, I was going to say equal ground, but somewhat to that, but then to recognize, like you said, to understand their background. They had a significant, trauma or whatever over here. Of course, well, or as you said, we all have something. So for me to be aware of myself and to realize, I don't want anything to trigger me. I don't want to be able to be provoked, but man, here's one issue. I really so Stephen, we're talking about this thing. I want you to know, in my own self-awareness, I would like to have that I struggle with being unbiased and unemotional because of this specific trauma. So just so you know, we're not on equal playing field, because that one's a hard one for me. And I want to be aware of that for myself, even if it's an admission of a weakness. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's critical to be aware of those in ourselves. And then another habit I talk about in the book is learning how to make it so that we ourselves can rationally deal with a particular topic that otherwise might trigger us, right? So, I can open up here to your listeners, I often have a high level of insecurity. You hear about imposter syndrome. You walk into a room, you always feel like you're the one person that doesn't belong.
I'm a member of the club.
There you go. So I have that. I'm often very insecure. I often just, for whatever reason, tend to assume that people in my professional life or in other areas think less of me or don't think I'm very intelligent. And I then will interpret all of their behavior through that lens. And what I often do then is interpret what they're doing negatively, and I kind of have emotional reactions to it. So I have to consciously, when I go into meetings or places, remind myself that that's some kind of baggage from my youth that I don't even understand. And I consciously tell myself, I'm going to walk into this room and assume that everyone here is happy to see me and that they respect me. And when I do that, how I interpret their behavior changes. It's almost a 180-degree flip. Suddenly the things that I might interpret negatively, I interpret positively, and I always end up having better reactions. But that is I feel like it's something that's never going to leave me. That is just part of who I am. And so I have to consciously get into the habit.
That's right where I was going to go, Stephen. Let me ask you, I'll ask you on that, because we're in the personal, development, self-help arena right here. And to hear that, to go, okay, I heard this guy, Stephen Collis, and he's talking about this. My gosh, he's a professor. He's got a book out. He's arrived. We got proof that he knows his stuff. And yet he says he still deals with imposter syndrome, that at some point the expectation in our industry here is that you will eradicate that. And I just at my age am kind of past feeling like I'm going to get rid of some of that, but sometimes I struggle with, am I making friends with it? Am I just learning how to manage it, to witness it, go, yeah, here's, I'm about to jump on the show with this guy. I know I'm going to do a good job. I've done over 270, of these types of shows. I have proven to myself and others, I know I'm going to do a good job. And there's the imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to wave at it and go forward. But I feel like it maybe is helpful to, eradicate, get rid of that myth that we are going to eradicate it. So like you just said, I don't know if I'm ever going to get rid of it. I was going to ask you that and you said it. So it's there, but do you look at, I just learned how to manage it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say not so much manage. I mean, manage it is a fine term, but I would say learn how to thrive despite it, whatever these personal things we have.
Kind of like the do it scared concept.
Yeah, we can engage in habits that will help us thrive despite. I do think there's some things that we can eradicate and overcome, but I think all of us have deep embedded parts of our psychology that we're probably not going to be able to just get rid of. So then the question is, how do we thrive despite it, right? And we have to. That requires some self-awareness, and this is where things like journaling and developing inner peace, perhaps professional therapy if we need it, to help us identify these things, and then. Don't be depressed because we have them. Everybody has weaknesses. Everybody has flaws. That's just part of being human. Now the question is, how do we thrive despite it? And, in my experience, like I say, with my kind of just whatever reason, I have this insecurity, reminding myself every time I go into a meeting, saying things to myself, I'm going to look at this meeting through the lens as if I'm not insecure and see how I interpret people's behavior. It's actually become kind of fun for me to go in and have that experience and watch and be like, oh, wow. This guy's actually a really nice guy, and he just said something really positive to me. I would have interpreted that differently if I wasn't doing this. It's become kind of an enjoyable experience, but the insecurity hasn't gone away. I have to consciously be aware of it.
Stephen, I had somebody recently on a show, and I'm disappointed I can't bring it up who it was. We were talking about this, and they said they appreciated my insecurity. They felt like it was part of my gifting in being, and having humility and whatnot. I mean, they went on, and I hadn't thought about that, because as I hear you, you start off the book with humility, as a point to make, and that your insecurity is, would you say that? I mean, in being a peacemaker, in being able to connect with people and truly care, it sounds bad to even say it, but in some degree, a level of insecurity is needed and best, because the opposite of that, if I don't, then you'd be coming here to me with absolute certainty. And if you did, I wouldn't have respect. You wouldn't be on the show. I wouldn't respect. So to that degree, I'm playing with it as I think about it. Would you say a level of insecurity? I mean, it doesn't have to be part of humility, but I feel there's a value in it. I don't know. Play with that with me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're hitting on the right thing. So I think can be like an unhealthy level of insecurity where you constantly feel everyone is a threat. You constantly feel everyone's out to undermine you. And so you do things to undermine them, and you behave negatively towards people, and you're always trying to self-promote. You're never trying to promote others. That's a very unhealthy level of insecurity. Yeah. But I do think a modest sense of insecurity can help with developing intellectual humility. And you're right. That's where I start the book, where I say, talk about how peacemakers engage in habits that help remind them of how little they actually know about any given topic and the world around them. And some level of insecurity, I think, actually can help with that, to remind us. Now, we don't all naturally have that insecurity. So I talk in the book about habits people can engage in to develop intellectual humility. But, one of the points I make in the book is, here I am, I'm a First Amendment law professor. For over a decade or more, I've been paid to do nothing but sit around and think about topics related to the First Amendment and write about them and teach about them. It's all I do, right? And I would guess I know maybe 5% of what I think is available and out there on the First Amendment. Like, when I start to really think through all the books that I've written, all the comparative analyses from like other countries and how they deal with the freedoms of the First Amendment, all the empirical questions we could ask, the historical questions we could ask, as I start to go through it all, I realize I know about 5%, I think, of what's out there. Now, that 5%, don't get me wrong, is vastly more knowledge on the First Amendment than a layperson who doesn't study it at all. And it makes me an expert as compared to them. But it also constantly reminds me that I can learn more. I don't know everything. Everyone I meet might have some new insight that I haven't thought about for these things, and I want to learn that from them, right? And now think about that. That's the one area that I'm an expert in. All these other things we fight about all the time, I probably would guess I know like as close to 0% as somebody could about that, right? Tax policy, I don't understand tax policy. I'm sure in my lifetime I've gotten in an argument with somebody about it before I realized how silly it was. I was arguing about something that I literally knew nothing about. And that's true for almost everything around us. So I think some insecurity can help with that, but if you don't naturally have that intellectual humility, then regularly reminding ourselves of how little we truly know about the world around us can go a long way to productive discourse and healthy conversations and really progress in our own lives.
Well, again, it's one of the reasons you're sitting here, because you hit a chord that has frustrated me, admittedly. And it is, I have a fairly full life. I've got a lot of kids. I've got, business. I got my personal pursuits. And then you come into a social situation and it feels like I feel a pressure that you are to be knowledgeable and have a strong, educated opinion that you make a stance on regarding everything. And if you don't, you're naive and ignorant and uneducated, and you're not being a valuable American. And I'm looking and go, I don't have time to invest myself in every topic out there. Yeah, it's enough to try to be an expert in my own field where I have a great passion. I want to go as deep as I can. And mine in this aspect of personal growth and human potential, I feel like I am an incredible expert. And every day I feel like I know less when I get down the rabbit hole of that. And now I'm supposed to go over here and have an opinion and deep knowledge on tax laws, or my gosh, going back to COVID. That's where it feels untenable. That there is this. Do you agree that it feels like this cultural pressure to have knowledge, understanding, an opinion, and a stance on every topic, and it feels impossible. And I find myself going, for better or worse, dude, I don't know. I just don't know much about that topic, and we don't want to admit that.
Yeah, we don't want to, and I think there's nothing. I have actually tried this now, and it's been amazing at how successful it's been of just telling people, you know what, on that particular topic, I just don't know enough to have a strong opinion. And I've been amazed at how much that diffuses conversations. And I have the fear that you just talked about. You fear people are going to think, well, this guy's an uneducated moron. But actually what that reflects is a thoughtfulness and you could say, like, I've read a little bit, but I'm not an expert on coronaviruses and how vaccines work and the methodology behind them. Watching a few YouTube videos doesn't make me an expert. I don't understand this area, and so I don't have a super strong opinion. Now, I want to emphasize, my book is not about avoiding having opinions or avoiding having conversations. We can have opinions on things, but I think what intellectual humility does is it nuances our opinions. It softens our opinions, right? I might have an opinion one way or another about vaccines and COVID-19, but I should couple that with the knowledge that unless I have a PhD in precisely that particular field, I should probably be pretty soft in my opinion, malleable, willing to change it, looking for more information, and acknowledge that in my opinion instead of stating it so strongly that I'm never going to budge off of it, right? Because the reality is most of us really don't know what we're talking about. I mean, here's an exercise I often go through. I tell people, like, go look around your room where you're sitting right now and ask yourself, those books behind you, how exactly were they made? What materials are they made of? What are the molecules doing in those materials that allow them to stay together in the structure they're in? How does the atmospheric pressure in the room affect them? What economic regulations played a role in their being made? What countries did they come from? I could go on all day long. And the reality is, even where we're sitting right here, you and I have about 0% of the knowledge available. Yeah. If we can remember that, it'll soften our opinions. It'll make us a little bit more open to changing our minds as we learn more. We'll want to learn more. It's a much healthier way to go about things. So we can have opinions, but I think we want to do it with a healthy degree of humility. One of my kids, she's 12 years old daughter, in the car this morning going to school. She sneezes a couple times, real big. And she says, Daddy, why do we sneeze? And I looked over at my 16-year-old daughter and I said,
Well, honey, we say bless you because apparently there's a demon inside of you trying to get out.
Yeah, right.
That's the cultural understanding. I don't really know. Something's tickling your nose. I don't know. And yeah, it's hard sometimes. They want to do that culturally. Feel like we've got to have an answer. So we don't. Go with me here. Then this interests me. We're going to look at social media and then the culture. Because I don't, I'm going to turn to people I think are experts. So here you are. I've never done a show with the First Amendment as a focal point at all. So here we are. I did my research on you. I looked at your social media. I looked at what we could of your family, of your personal, what I deemed as your values and your stances, whatever. I read your book in entirety and I'm going, I resonate with you. I resonate with you. And from that, I have to admit there's a level of trust. Now, if I am at a social gathering tomorrow and somebody asks me about the First Amendment, of course, as you write in the book, I got to watch out that I don't have, what do you call it, the beginner's bubble?
Yeah, there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where at the very beginning of something you think you know everything, when the reality is you really don't know anything, right?
I just did a show with a guy, and so let me tell you. So I'll guard myself there, but I did learn a lot. I resonated with them, and it actually helped formulate some feelings and opinions that I have. But now, if I look at the truth, that somebody wouldn't they be relevant to go, oh, so your stance is based on that guy, your trust in that guy. You're not on the front lines. You haven't really researched this at all. You read a book and you had a discussion with a guy you resonated with, and now you have this opinion, and especially if I'm showcasing it with certainty, and it's all based on you. I mean, we're in a trust economy right now. There's so much information out there that we tend to, like that. Somebody just heard you say, oh my gosh, the news seriously is gearing itself, when I go to the New York Times or whatever, gearing itself to what I like. I can't even trust that. So we're going to go back to you or to Joe Rogan or to Taylor Swift or whoever we put our trust in, and they say something. And now we have this opinion that in truth is based on a person or maybe a group.
Yeah. And so again, you've got what, 0.01% of the opinions that you could have out there about any given topic, because you heard it from one expert who just admitted he knows 5% of what's available, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'll tell you something about, being an expert in a field at a university. There are as many opinions about various First Amendment topics as there are professors to study them. I mean, disagreements over history, over empirical research, over the norms we should be applying. It just goes on and on and on and on, right? So, yeah, we got to be careful about relying too much on others. Now, again, we can form opinions, but it should just come with a degree of humility. The correct move for someone in your situation would be at the next party would be like, instead of stating an opinion super forcefully, because you talked to a guy who was an expert in a field, is, I talked to this one guy. I'm sure there's other people who disagree, but this one scholar was saying this. I thought it was interesting, kind of resonated with me. What do you think? Right? It's a much softer approach than I talked to a guy and now I know everything, and I'm gonna tell the whole world about it. But that most of us tend to act the second way. Not enough of us act the first way of recognizing there's how little we actually know, despite the people we've met or the people we listen to.
I'm attracted to that of people who admit that they don't know as much. And again, it comes from my own history. And man, I was so certain in my past, and I have left that because it's been proven that I obviously don't know everything and I'm not God. It's just, there's unequivocal proof out there. And so for me to stand on that, like I've got an opinion. And also I think, according to my age, and I would say you're in the ball. How old are you, Stephen?
Mid-40s.
Mid-40s. Okay. There's more at stake. And in the past, I think I was able to state those things. Well, let's go to that. Because there are some things where the stakes are high. But if we look at the common discussions, debates, arguments that we have, the social media stuff, there's really nothing at stake. Somebody mouths off about something and I mouth off back, and nothing is at stake. Now, if they were next to me in the grocery line, I wouldn't do that, because what might be at stake is I might get hit by somebody or attacked by being that forceful with my opinion. And we wouldn't do that. We're not as volatile in face-to-face social situation as we are on social media or in our cars where we can get aggressive and whatnot. How much is that perpetuating things that we do have? We have an influx of information we didn't used to have, so we can think that we know a lot about things, and we can mouth off about it with nothing at stake, in essence.
And I'll just tie that back to the habits of gaining inner peace, and I also talk about the habit. Chapter 2 is about gaining real learning, like really engaging in real learning. Right? Think about what how much time do people spend, and I'm sure we're all a little bit different, arguing online where the stakes are literally just maybe at zero or below. We're getting nothing out of that. We're not engaging in real learning. We're not developing a sense of inner peace. We're actually, in fact, doing the opposite. And we're going to look back on our lives, I think, with a whole lot of regret, especially when we realize that probably 50% of the time or more, the things that we are arguing with on the internet are bots being controlled by artificial intelligence from foreign actors who are trying to get us to fight with someone else, right? I recommend to folks, look, I like what you said about the difference between how we behave around people versus online. Spend more time with people, right? Let's get off and let's replace the dopamine hits we're getting from social media and our smartphones with spending time with people, doing all sorts of fun things that this world provides. Spend more time reading books. I would take the 3 hours people spend all day on TikTok and Instagram. Some people it's as much as 8 or 10 hours, and read long form books. Get informed about a particular topic that you're interested in. Read 2 books that are from people with different views, right? And inform yourself that way. It's hard to do. I get it, because again, we're facing teams of psychologists who are trying to get us addicted. But if we can replace that with these other healthier activities, how much better will our personal lives be? And if we get enough people doing that, how much better will the whole world be, really? And I know that sounds like pie in the sky and silly, but each of us can make a change in our own lives, and it can make a dramatic difference just in our families and our relationships with our kids, our spouses, at work.
No, man, being with people, no, it's huge. So we speak to the blue zones. Dan Buettner's the blue zones a lot, and finding those groups. This morning, I found myself talking with the guys about the Inklings. Right. So most people have heard about that. That's C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and all these other guys who got together with kindred spirits as writers and maybe some similar interests. And they really shared in depth. But we had a lady on the show who studies, she's a professor and studied the Inklings and wrote a book about it called Bandersnatch. It was a respectful group, though. I mean, if you weren't in there if you were in there just to mouth off with nothing at stake, you weren't invited back. And I think about my guys this morning. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of it is we're there to be respectful. If I just go in and mouth off, I'm going to be ousted. So I'm in there to be thoughtful and to ask relevant questions and really be open. That's by proxy. That's the group. And that helps. So to have those groups, though I'm interested with you. I mean, the blue zone concept, the propensity is to get around kindred spirits. It may not be to get around people who are pushing you from the other side, which brings up your point of making the argument. If we all had to take our stance and I've wondered that if somebody said, hey, I'll give you 50 grand to make a really good argument for the other side, I'd probably do it. And I wonder what the chances are I'd convince myself to the other side, or at least a lot further towards them. Yeah.
Or you nuance your own position, or you'd find more confidence in your position because you've considered the strongest argument and you still don't find it persuasive. I mean, all of that is a positive outcome from engaging in that practice. But, chapter 8 is titled Spend Time with People. And I talk about how the U.S. Constitution got drafted. There's a great a legal scholar named Derek Webb, and he did this research, not into what the Constitution means, but how they pulled it off. We can debate all day as to whether or not the Constitution or, the flaws in the constitutions and things like that. But for what it achieved, it's really quite miraculous. You had these 13 colonies, all with different interests, people in them all fighting each other because of their different interests. Somehow they came together and get this document that allows them to unite the states and become the United States. And he talks about how on earth did they actually pull that off despite their deep disagreements? And part of what he talks about is how when they did the Constitutional Convention, there were very few places to stay. So they were all crammed in together in the same inns and restaurants. And when they weren't actually working on the Constitutional Convention, they were sharing some of the same beds, eating in the same places, playing games. Like they were forced to just spend time with each other and get to know each other on a personal level. That then allowed much more productive conversations when they went in to have to do the real business of trying to draft a, at the time, unheard of constitution, right? And so for me, it's like, when you get with somebody you disagree with, you don't have to talk about that disagreement. Every second of the day you're with them. Go bowling, go biking together, go hike around, go have a party, watch the sports team you agree on, spend time with one another. Then when it's time to talk about things on which you do disagree, you're going to have a much more healthier and productive conversation. I admit in the book that this is my biggest challenge. There's a reason I do this from a profession. I like talking about these things, right? This is what I like to do. I enjoy it. It's fun. What I've learned over the years is not everybody wants to sit around talking about the freedom of speech and campus protests all day long, right? Like I have to remind myself, turn this off. We're here to watch a football game. I can talk about the campus protests another time. And I have to train myself to do that so I can just build friendships and build relationships with people.
Well, I feel I'm questioning myself because even here on this show, I bring people on whose messages I resonate with. Not that I don't get my toes stepped on. I hope I'm here in humility that, man, I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn and be taught, but I'm not bringing people on who have decidedly different opinions. I guess on one hand, it makes sense. On the other hand, what am I missing out on?
Right. And I don't know, maybe for your podcast, that's not the appropriate setting. I don't know, maybe because you have a particular mission for your podcast and you're trying to achieve that mission. And so maybe that's not what you want to do. But I think in our personal lives, or perhaps you, in your personal life, you've got opinions that you're trying to promote on the podcast, but I think you'd always want to be asking yourself, are those opinions right?
Yeah.
Who disagrees with me? I need to go get books and read the best arguments. And again, not straw man arguments, not arguments that are easy to shoot down, but the best arguments. And I emphasize in the book, every position we have has a cost. Every opinion we have about the world, there's a cost affiliated with it. And we need to know that cost. Now, sometimes that cost can be very low and it's not, economists call this opportunity cost, right? By being here with you, I'm giving up something else. There's no such thing as a free lunch, as like the economist's favorite saying. If you go and somebody says you give a free lunch, and economists will jump in and say, well, it's not free. Even if they're giving it to you, you're giving up the time. You could be eating something else, right? There's all these arguments. Well, that's true for our opinions. On every solution we think we have about the world, there's a cost. Now, those costs may not persuade us to change our mind. Those costs may be minimal, but it's important to know what they are and think about them and be able to respond to them. And we have to go out and really seek out those costs and understand them better. And too many of us don't spend enough time doing that. So for you, there's a cost to not having people who disagree with you on your podcast, but you might look at it and say, but that's not the purpose of my podcast. So I'm okay not doing that. But at least you've thought it through and you're aware of it. That's kind of,
well, at the least it gives me pause to think about doing my research, even coming to the show and going, okay, here's the focal point. Here's the value I'm upholding. It's my show and I've got an agenda with it. It's something I think is valuable. I want to offer it to you. Now, here's the critic's side of it. And it probably has some weight to it. I mean, to some degree, as when I was talking to the guys this morning about your book, I said, to some degree, if I was going to sum it up, I'd say, just respect people. Just respect. And I'm telling this to myself as well. So what you just talked about, though, with the Constitution, it was in habit 3 of your book, Assume the Best About People, that I'm reading about that. And I think maybe that's where the story you had about the judges it was kind of a concept like that, like the Constitution. They came together, but they were housing together. A lot of them were eating together. And I thought it's a goofy analogy, Stephen, but I literally went and searched it. And I'm thinking back to, oh my gosh, what would this be? This would be like, 45 years ago, Saturday morning cartoons. And I had this memory of this dog and this wolf who fought. And so I went and searched it and I found it out. Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog. So it was one of these, like the Roadrunner, where they just come together and beat the crap out of each other. But it was so interesting, the depiction. And I found a video on it on YouTube where they come in and they clock in. Like they're clocking in for their job for the day. They clock in and it's, hey, Sam. Hey, Ralph. Good morning. They say that, then they clock in, then they go over here, beat the crap out of each other like they did in the cartoons,
Right.
and then they finally, the bell rings and they come back, clock out. Have a good evening, Ralph. Have a good evening, Sam. I thought that's brilliant. That concept of no matter what we're debating about at the end, and you talk about this, that person who's you're debating with has a family, they have fears, they've had traumatic things happen, and they're worried about the bills or a relationship. And, kind of that thing of they still got to put on their underwear in the morning.
Well, think about it this way too. Somebody asked me, I was doing a TV interview the other day, and someone asked me, well, what's your comment on presidential debates? What can we learn about, productive discourse from presidential debates? And one thing I told them was like, look, you got to remember what these candidates' goals are in a presidential debate. Their goals are not productive discourse. And I don't begrudge them for that. Their goals are to win an election. Yeah. They're trying to make themselves look good and their opponent look bad, and they're going to play to their strengths to do that. And different types of candidates will use different methodologies, but their goal is not productive discourse. What's amazing is you'll often watch them on stage just beat the crap out of each other, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I would tell people watch a presidential debate and take notes on what not to do. But then what you'll see oftentimes is after the debate's over or backstage, they'll say like, oh, good job. Oh, you got me on that one. You know what I mean? They are playing a role on stage, and then when they come off, now I'm sure not all politicians are like this at all, but many of them know how to have productive discourse. That's just simply not their role on stage. So it reminds me of that story you just told, right? They kind of clock in, they get on stage, they beat each other up, and then they get backstage. And sometimes you'll even see politicians talking about the moves the other one made. Oh, I thought I had him on the roast, but then he pivoted and he made this funny joke and got the audience in his favor. And they can talk about it in a rational way when they're not performing.
Okay, well, let's hit that though, Stephen, because it bothers me. I bother myself a lot with that concept, because when you look at that debate, so here we are, we have people on stage, like in the debate. They're not on their own. It's not just salted. They've got teams of people paid a lot of money to help them win that argument. And I would think, in my naivety, maybe, that if I was the person counseling them, I'd say, if you want to win people, be respectful and don't sling mud. And I would be, take the higher road. And apparently that's not the counsel being given to them, which I tend to feel grieved about, that they're choosing the mudslinging because that's what the culture wants, or that's what the game is. And it's not, as you said, it's not about productive discourse or respect. Apparently it's about that. That hurts.
Yeah. It breaks my heart. And I really do think that if somebody wants to, if voters, people listening to this want to make a difference in the world, we have to stop rewarding that behavior, right? This is a relatively new ethic among presidential debates. And
I know. I appreciate your story. You talked about Reagan and Mondale back in, this was 1980. I was like 9 years old at that point, but I remember some of that, and it did seem like there was a modicum of respect that is totally gone now.
Yeah. And I think, this is, again, I think it's relatively new and modern. And I just really hope that voters stop rewarding candidates for that behavior, so that candidates will return to a more respectful form of discourse and debate. Again, I don't think their goal on stage, no matter how respectful they are to one another, is productive discourse. They're not trying to, I define productive discourse as understanding an issue better together, understanding someone else a little bit better and why they disagree with us, together understanding more facts about something so we can talk about it intelligently, maybe even inching closer to reaching a conclusion. That to me is productive discourse. That's not the goal of politicians, no matter how respectful they are. But I really think we've entered an era where for some reason voters are rewarding that kind of disrespectful dialogue that politicians are engaging in. And it's really quite unhealthy. I don't know about you, but I'm hesitant to show my children presidential debates, my younger children, because I don't want them modeling that behavior. I don't want them to think that that's how they should be behaving in society. We want respectful discourse, not calling people names, not accusing them of things that are ridiculous. It's frustrating to me that that's being rewarded right now.
Let me ask this then, Stephen. This has bothered me since COVID. and the unproductive discourses that happened around that. And it dawned on me that when we have these issues that come up, we're not talking to people who are on the front lines for the most part. The debate arises, and from that point on in the media, who we hear from is in essence the hired gunslinger or the lawyer, who is not looking for productive discourse. They are looking to, as you said, win, like in a political debate. If we are there for true, healthy discourse to find what's best, well, I assume that's what you get hired for. That's what you get brought in for.
Yeah. And the challenge is, like, true experts on a lot of things often don't have a big platform, right? The true experts on, and I'm talking about, researchers whose only goal is to try to understand what this virus is like, how dangerous it really is, whether or not there's a viable vaccine. There are very few of those people in the world, and most of them are not spending their days talking to the public, engaged in online debates, engaged in television debates. They're working on trying to figure out solutions. And so getting a hold of folks like that can be a challenge. Now, again, I will say, just like with anything, or just like within my field, specializing in the First Amendment, I think that different scientists had different views about the coronavirus, the pandemic, that kind of a thing. And I think what I advised people to do back then, and I still think today, is it's not research to watch some YouTube videos from people you already agree with. It's not research to read a few op-eds from people you already agree with. TikTok is not a good place for research. Go hunt for the scholarly articles from people truly in the field. And I know that there are folks who will say, well, I don't trust the experts. They're all compromised and biased. I agree. Experts can be biased. This is why we have to read from more than one and find out the different sources, look for countervailing counter arguments. Everything I'm saying takes a whole lot of time. If we don't have the time to do it, then that's where some humility should come in, and we should recognize that we probably don't know as much as we think we do about it. I don't know about you, but I don't really know anything about coronaviruses and how they work and the nature of them. I know there's a million different kinds. I mean, I'm not an expert on that.
That's where it came up. So my best friend and business partner at the time during COVID is a medical doctor. He's a functional medicine expert, but he's an MD. So of course, what are his patients doing? What should I do? Should I get a vaccine or not? And he's supposed to know. He's a doctor. Doctors are supposed to know everything, for one, and that's what they felt like they're paying him for. And he's going, man, I'm not on the front lines. I'm not researching this. So he went to the people that he trusted and was really frustrated with, here's somebody he trusts who was absolutely get a vaccine or you're spawn of Satan. And somebody else who he totally respects, who feels like they're on the front lines, saying the exact opposite. And now he's supposed to direct his patients. And he was struggling whether to get it himself. And that's somebody that people think is absolutely an expert, that they should know. And they're going, it's really difficult to know. And even if you go to the people on the front lines, and yet we're, again, supposed to all have a certain stance.
Right. Well, and kudos to him for being humble about that. I mean, I can't tell you how many doctors will be like, yeah, here's my opinion. I'm a doctor. You should listen to me. And you're like, you're an anesthesiologist. You don't know anything about viruses. Like, I don't care that you went to medical school. You studied this for a day and a half, and then you specialized in something that has nothing to do with it. So kudos to him for that humility. This all brings me to something I think I worried as I was drafting the book that I would leave people feeling as if they had to navigate life either not having opinions or not being certain about anything. Right. And I didn't. And I already explained, I think people can have opinions, but they should be softer, more nuanced, with a dose of humility and a willingness to change our minds. But then I also talk about there are some things in life that we can be certain on. Right. We don't have to spend our whole life saying, well, since I don't understand anything, I just better just be a blob on and not have opinions and not vote, not do anything. One thing I talk about that peacemakers are certain about is how they treat others. That's at least one area of life that we can all say, okay, I'm going to be certain about this, right? I'm going to be certain that I'm going to try to lift others up. I'm going to be certain that I'm going to try to act selflessly. In my case, I give the example of my family. My career from the very beginning, I wrote down in a journal what my priorities were going to be and how I was going to divide up my time. I mean, I literally broke out every 24-hour period. I thought, this is how I'm going to break up my time. And I'm not just going to say my family is the priority. this is the time for them. And it was, I'd be home for dinner every night. They would have my time on the weekends. And if I couldn't succeed in whatever job I was in within those boundaries, with exceptions for emergencies and things, but if I couldn't succeed within those boundaries, then I would find a different job where I could have those boundaries and succeed in that job. And those are the types of things I was certain in. And I think we can all be certain in those types of things, even if there's stuff like the pandemic and the coronavirus where it's hard for us to be certain because we're just not experts and we're not sure the experts even know, if that makes sense. So
totally. And to carry that further, my buddy Randy, who people on the show know because I have him on here a lot and talk about him a lot, he ultimately said, at one point he says, I'm finding less reasons not to get vaccinated. I'm finding less reasons, not to than ever. And so I'm going to go ahead and go do it. And so he and I and a buddy, we went and got vaccinated. Today, he's not sure that was the best, choice. And even that, when you talk about, certainty, what you just said right there made me think of morals, obviously, but ultimately character. So you may decide with certainty you're not going to, steal or cheat or have an affair or ever physically hit your child or whatever. Those are things that we can be certain about. But otherwise, we have these discussions like I do with my friends so much. And we'll often have lunch here at the office on the back deck and talk about these things and then stand up. And the joke has gotten to be, well, all that discussion, I stand up and I go make my choice and go, okay, the concept that we've tried to adopt is, okay, at this point, to the best that I can figure out from my own experience and what seems to resonate and from what, little research I've done, I'm going to make a decision on this and I'm going to vote for this person or get vaccinated or not, or buy an electric car or not, or I'm going to recycle or not. And we do have to make a decision. But even there, instead of feeling like I have to do it with absolute certainty, to just admit it's just the best that I've come up with. So I've decided to put faith in this. And I'm going to step forward. It's kind of like the old Indiana Jones thing where he's going across the chasm.
Yeah. And you do it for now. I mean, because you say, like, with the vaccination thing, you're making a choice one way or the other. You're either getting vaccinated or you're not. And choosing not to act is a choice not to get vaccinated. Right. So you're making that choice regardless, but it's okay to say, I'm making the best choice I can with the information I have. I might later say I'm wrong. This is another thing I emphasize in the book about, Webb's research about the founding of the Constitution. They had very strict rules that none of the positions they took would be reported outside the room, so that they would have the flexibility to change their minds if they learned something else later and they realized they were wrong. None of us, I mean, maybe some of your guests are, but I'm not running for office. No one's going to hold it against me if I change my mind on something. I can decide something now in my life, change my mind a year from now, and it's not going to get tweeted about and reported on CNN, and I'm going to get blasted by a million people and get voted out of being Steve, right? Like I can go ahead and make the best choice I have with the information I have. And then if I learn new information a year later, change my mind and life will go on. It's okay. That's not the end of the world. In fact, it's great positive. You've learned something new. You've made progress, and hopefully you are looking back at past choices and realizing you didn't make as good a choice as you would. That's a sign that you're progressing in life.
I would say it gives me more respect for you to hear you say, gosh, I learned something new and I changed as a result, as opposed to, no, I'm just going to hold on. Steve, I do want to pull something out that you said a second ago. And my notes I wrote down, you said something to the effect of true experts don't have a big platform. I have literally changed some of my perspective with this show. I even say it in the new intro that I'm doing now. And it is because I, thank goodness, with a lot of the publishers, especially the agencies that I work with, PR agencies, a lot of times they're working with people and they've got, a big following and a big platform, and nothing against those folks at all. But I'm so aware every day that there's academics, I'll say, people in academia who they're busy doing research and teaching classes, or therapists. They're busy in their office, in their clinic, working with clients and patients, or people over here who are researching in labs, and they don't have big platforms. And I had a lot of the agencies and publishers, and they would go, gosh, yeah, so sorry, the person you may, question their credibility. They don't have any following anywhere. They've been teaching at Harvard for 20 years. And there's been this perspective that we hear from the best people have a big following, and that's why. And I'm wanting to say that's not the case that I find, because some of the best people are in there. They're spending their time, as you said, doing what they do, working on their thing. And they also may not be performance extroverts, which means we're not going to hear from them. And so I want to find those people, because a lot of times I feel like they have the best information and they may never have a big following. Now, here I am, and I hope that I help you sell, 100,000 books because it's a great message. But that also kind of brings forth that where is the truth? We're hearing from the hired gunslingers, not from the people who are in the trenches actually doing the work, who are not these, they're not in a fight for this. They're just trying to find the best truth to help people.
Yeah, you really hit on something here. When I talk around the country, by the way, I hope you help me sell 100,000 copies too. And hope all your listeners
we'll do our best.
Tell 10 of their friends to go buy the book. But
yeah,
I find there's kind of four types of academics, at least in my field. So you get the self-promoters.
Yep.
These are people who come up with an idea and that's just what they push. They push. They're online all the time. They're pushing their things. You get activists who are they're activists for whatever cause they're into. There are the loafers. These are the people that realize that they've got a pretty good job that pays well and they probably don't have to work very hard if they don't want to. And then you've got what I'll call the true scholars. These are the folks you're talking about, the ones that they're interested in discovering knowledge and truth and passing that on to their students and other academics and other people and publishing their research. Everybody falls into all four of those categories to some degree at different times or whatnot. But the folks you're talking about, this is the really sad thing about our current environment. The folks that have these huge online followings, more often than not always, I want to be very clear about this. Not always, but I got it. More often than not, they tend to be the self-promoters or the activists.
Yeah.
They want to enjoy the reputation of being the scholars, of being the true scholars just seeking after truth. But really what they are, the self-promoters or activists. And the true scholars, the really thoughtful people that are just trying to solve problems and digging deep and publishing really great, thoughtful stuff, they're spending their time doing that. They're not spending their time tweeting and arguing with people online and self-promoting everything they have. And I'll tell you right now, I'm in the middle of this book tour. It's killing me on some level because I can't spend time doing the writing and the research I want to do. I've got this pile of books on my desk that I want to read. I keep ordering them. I'm so excited to get to them. And then, I'm doing things like this. This takes time. Being online all the time takes time. And so I don't have a huge following because that's not my goal. I want to be writing and exploring ideas and thinking about real problems. And, I sacrifice what I sacrifice for that is I won't sell as many books so people won't hear about me. But I hope that maybe my research will make a difference for folks, or maybe it'll touch.
I want to be the bridge, Steve. I want to be I need a connection to Oprah so I can say, oh my gosh, this dude's book is tremendous. We don't want him taking his time away from his research. Will you just go tell everybody the book's awesome so he sells 1 million copies and he can do more of the research? That's maybe that's my goal.
Yeah, and I would love it if that kind of stuff could happen, but it's hard, right? Because as you say, those types of folks are not self-promoters. They often are introverted, and they're not playing the game, and that's the challenge.
Well, I'm going to quote you on some of that because it's something that is important to me. I realize that even as an athlete, that sometimes we never see in the Olympics the best athlete. We see the ones that can put it together, and there's politics and bureaucracy around it. The best core athletes, I saw them. I saw them here and there. People far better than I was that they never made it to the pro ranks. And it was a shame because it takes more than just talent or ability.
But you probably also know too that the best athletes, or even the ones getting into the pros and getting recognition, have an intense ability to focus on their craft and zone everything else out, right? Including too much self-promotion. I think of the big names we see. Generally, they've just got whole teams of people doing the promotion so that they can zero in on their craft and what they're focusing on, right? And there's a great book, and I'm blanking on the name and the author, which is disappointing to me, but it talks about this, the idea of how do we engage in truly focused work. One of the things he emphasizes is if you look at the period. Newport. Yes, Cal Newport, right? And he talks about how deep work, I love that, right? He talks about if you look at J.K. Rowling's most productive years, almost zero presence on social media when she's drafting all of these books that are selling millions, right? It's only after she kind of stops working on the core drafting that suddenly she starts this online presence and becomes a more controversial figure on the internet and everything else. But during her productive time, when she's actually generating stuff that's really generating value to people, she was not doing that. She was focused on what she was doing. And we see that again and again and again, I think, in all areas of life, really.
I agree. Okay. Thank you for that. That was a worthwhile focus. Yeah, we could do a 5-hour show here, but there are some points I want to hit. I so appreciate this. Going back to, the concept of productive discourse, you made a statement, and I've got it somewhere in my notes. I'm going to paraphrase it from the book, that if you and I are having a discussion that is prone to go into just fighting for our opinions, me asking you a good question, a relevant and a good and a thoughtful question, actually puts pressure on you. If I just come forth and just spout my converse opinion, it just kind of feeds how did you say that? It kind of feeds the dopamine. It just kind of feeds the fire. And that's what we tend to do. Not only is it more respectful and relevant to productive discourse for me to ask a question, but it puts the pressure on you, if you're just coming off spouting opinions that you don't know about, to really back them up. So it's kind of it's a win-win on that front. But again, what we do in the social media aspect, or on live TV during debates, is we're just slinging back, and it just fuels. Did you say that? The dopamine? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, that's right. But it's critical here. The type of question matters. So there's been scholarship into this about how if you ask people questions to justify their positions, it often will lead to increased anger and defensiveness, so they get defensive. But if you ask them questions about, now you can get to the point where you can ask those questions, but if you start out of the gate with that, what it feels like is a rhetorical attack, that you're just trying to attack them and prove that they don't really have a foundation for why they believe what they believe. The types of questions that actually can be effective are asking them, what are the implications of their position? That tends to get people to be thoughtful. So if somebody comes in and says, the government should mandate everybody has to get a COVID-19 vaccine, since we've been talking about vaccines.
Yeah.
If you ask the question, and you ask it sincerely, you're not trying to make a point. You say, what would the implications of that be? Does that mean, what if there's people who might be allergic to it? Like, would they have to do it as well? How would that work? And you just ask questions. The research has shown that causes people who have really strong opinions to moderate their opinions down. And then you can start having a more healthy conversation about, well, what are the evidence for our two sides? Let's look at it together and see what we think we know versus what we actually know. Then you can start to have a healthy conversation. So yeah, questions like that can be absolutely critical.
We played with that, Steve, this morning, again, with your book as a muse on thinking about that. And one of the guys brought up abortion, which has got to be one of the most volatile, divisive aspects out there. And I grew up in a, staunch Christian construct where it's not an issue. This is not open for debate. It's wrong, period, end of story. That's it. Well, now that I've actually lived some life and experienced life and been in and witnessed and experienced other people's journeys in there, I at least have great compassion for, oh my gosh, what a difficult thing that involves, a lot of people. And talk about kind of making the case for the other side. Man, there's a great case, I believe, on both sides. Now, at the end of it, it's interesting. You talked about kind of the polarized aspect of things, that a lot of things, gosh, you made one analogy of, on one side is this and one side is this. And in the middle in the spectrum is courage, is what you said. I remember that part. But then there are some issues like abortion, for instance, where it's one or the other. There's not really a middle ground. Either you are okay with it and fight for it, or you are against it and you fight for it. And that's difficult. But still, if we come in and have compassion and understanding, ask the hard questions of the people who have been in hard places on both sides, it at least, again, it should foster, what would you say? I mean, just a great sense of respect and humility.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, there can be nuanced ways the law can be structured with regards to abortion. And it's complicated and it's messy, but at least at a minimum, again, I emphasize this again and again and again, finding the most persuasive and strongest arguments against your position. That might not
Yes.
change your view. If you have the view, if you genuinely have the view that at the moment of conception, you're dealing with a human life, and you believe that in your core, then you really can't make exceptions to allow abortion because you would believe that that's murder, right? So you can't change your view. And a lot of people don't have that belief. I'm just talking as a hypothetical. But if that's really your belief, you have to act accordingly. But at least you can take the time to understand why there might be all sorts of other beliefs, why some people might believe that human life does not start right at the moment of conception. Why there might be over other concerns about the health of women or what would happen to a baby born in a situation that's not going to be raised in any type of healthy way, right? We could go on all day. My point is taking the time to understand those arguments so at least you can respond to them in a healthy, rational, intellectual way instead of just screaming at someone that they're a baby killer. You're not going to persuade somebody or get them to think differently about something if you just start screaming out accusations like that. And you can't, to get away from screaming accusations like that, you have to understand what their concerns are. What are their worries? What are they trying to solve? Then you can have a conversation.
Well, and to that point, I think you mentioned this in your book to some aspect, is have any of us ever gone on to the Facebook wall and seen a debate from somebody and go, oh my gosh, I'm totally convinced, to another side. Right. It doesn't have, I'm so glad I went to Facebook. I've changed my life and bettered myself because of that. I mean, it's never happened. You go there just to piss on each other. It's just by proxy kind of what it is.
And I don't know about you, but I was just thinking about this the other day about when in my life have I changed my mind on issues or has somebody really influenced me to think differently?
Yeah.
It's almost always people who have been in my life for the long game.
Yeah.
And are kind, and I respect them. And oftentimes it's not them making direct arguments to me. It's me hearing them say something, separately and me thinking about it, or me having a lot of respect for them. And then they write something and I'll read it on my own. And that's where my shift happens. It's not when somebody comes up to me and says, you're an idiot. Let me tell you how you should think differently about your life. Like that has never persuaded anybody, I don't think, right? It's more through this more subtle kindness, example of how one lives their lives that helps people change, not through just direct attack.
That's a great audit. I mean, for everybody here and myself included, to think, when have I changed my mind or changed my position? What was it? What was the source? What was it from? And it's got to be relationship by far and large. The term you used that I was hunting for a minute ago when I said polarized is dichotomous. And I like that. I've been thinking about those terms of, dualistic thinking and black and white, that we're in a culture that does that. And dichotomous thinking is a word I'll start using now. And that has gotten to be our culture instead of, again, as you said somewhere in the book, the idea of a spectrum. It's usually not just, again, abortion may be, it's either you choose one way or the other, but a lot of these issues, there's spectrums and there's spectrums inside of spectrums.
That's right. And, we're wired to engage in dichotomous thinking, researchers have proven that. And so then the question is, how do we get out of it? And we get out of it by engaging in all the habits we've been talking about. But on so many issues, there are far more, as you say, there are far more than just one choice on one side and one choice on the other. There's a range of options and ways of thinking about things and nuanced ways of discussing them. And playing with that, spending time with it, looking for more nuanced views, it's actually kind of fun. Life becomes quite enjoyable when you kind of get curious and want to learn in that way, instead of just breaking every single debate down into one of two options, picking one side and then just screaming at all the people on the other side that you perceive to be on the other side. This is a great thing too. I'll tell you, I have a colleague, a law professor. He brings in everyone into the class. Everyone in the class at the beginning of their 1L year of law school, as we call first year of law school 1L year, they all assume that, they're on one side of the political spectrum and everyone else is on the other side. They kind of come in and do this. So he's done this thing where he asks them anonymously what their political views are, and he'll give them, like extreme left, moderate, and then the other direction to the right, and I'll have them all fill it out anonymously, and then he'll compile all the data. And what he's been able to show them is that if you look around the class, it's basically like across the entire spectrum, evenly distributed among any given class. And he shows them that to tell them, like, first of all, you're not alone. And second of all, we have as many views about this world in this room as there are students. So don't be afraid to share your ideas. Don't be afraid to talk about them. Some people can agree with you on some and not on others, but you guys are not polarized right and left. And none of you is on an island by yourselves. There's an even distribution all around you. So let's now have discussions. It's a great exercise that he engages in. And I suspect we'd probably find that about most groups in our world if we were to actually really able to do it.
That's super interesting. I would also wonder, amongst the answers, how many of them are really solid and even knowing where they stand. Right. I sometimes look at that and think of myself as I think of myself, or I want to think of myself this way, but my actions actually point to something very different. So I wonder, it would be like, a self-reporting thing. That'd be interesting. So how do you rate yourself, where you fall on the line, like you just talked about? Now let's ask all your family and friends where they would rate you and see how much that lines up. That'd be an interesting.
I'm sure we all think we're the most rational person in the room, and everyone else would have very different views, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What was that stat? It was like, I think they did it on college professors, and it was like, 90% of them think that they're above average.
Right.
The numbers don't work. But you are. We know that, Stephen, for sure. That's irrefutable. But the others, it doesn't work out for. When we look at this, well, I'll ask you, because it brings up the question of, do I want to be right, or do I want to find the truth? In essence, would you look at that? And truth is always a difficult word, because, so much of what we land on is not irrefutable fact, but we're looking for what seems to be the most, back to productive discourse, that seems to be the most productive, that creates the most wellness and good life, or whatever, that you have devoted yourself, or you want to devote yourself to, finding out what is best, what is true. But to do that, we have to leave this, I don't know. Well, again, what would you say? The ego of it's more important to be right and to be secure.
Yeah, I think if you start off in there, again, except in the areas where I think we all know we should be certain, how we treat others, that kind of a thing. But like, I think in most subject matters, we worry not about being right, and worry about how to find. My favorite sentence when people ask me my politics, like, what's your politics? I say, I want to find effective solutions to real problems. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that language. It's not something I just kind of say casually, because think about it. That means I want to know that I'm actually dealing with a real problem. And I want to know what evidence there is to show me that it's actually a real problem, not just someone's perceived problem. Yeah. And I want to know that the solutions people are offering me are actually effective solutions to that real problem. And so I want to know the evidence. I want to explore it. I want to know more about it. When I get into conversations, I'm not interested in proving I'm right with whatever opinion I had last week with the limited knowledge I had. I'm interested in, do you have something else to help me get to an effective solution to the real problem? Have we defined the problem wrong? Do you have information to suggest to me that what I thought was a problem isn't a problem? Can you tell me what the costs are of whatever solution you're proposing is, so I can decide if I think it's an effective solution, right? Sometimes the solution's more costly than the problem itself. Like, I want to know answers to those questions, and I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in answering those types of questions. And my take is that is far more productive, and it's a much better path to being a peacemaker than just trying to prove people or get people to agree with me on whatever opinion I last took on a given topic.
Steve, I've been in therapy sessions and told the therapist, look, quit affirming and coddling me. I'm not paying for that. I don't need that. I'm here to be pointed out what I'm doing wrong so I can do something better. And it reminds me of that aspect. And on that note, even to go, it's in habit 5 or 4 of your book, Don't Feed People's Worst Fears, that you talk about bias. And everybody's heard, aspects of confirmation bias, but reading your book again just brings up how dramatic it is in our culture and inherently in me. I mean, what do I get the most excited about? Something that confirms how I feel already. Even as I'm seeking truth and seeking correction and whatnot, I mean, there's the dopamine hit, and it's my bias. And especially if I'm in an insecure place. And yet I look at that, and we look at these fights that are happening. We mentioned the word triggers before, and reading your book, I thought about being provoked. And I don't want to be able to be triggered. I don't want to be able to be provoked. I would like to think that I'm the kind of guy who is not provocable. Is that true? I won't ever know for sure, because there's a lot of areas I'll probably never be tested. And I hope I'm not, like I'm never the kind of guy that would murder somebody. Well, I've never had somebody attack my child next to me and see what happens if I was even capable of that. But to that point, your book overall, I want to be a peacemaker. I want to be the kind of person who is strong enough, confident enough that I'm open to discussing anything and to questioning anything, to be what our culture seems to be, which I have participated in, the certainty and the fighting for whatever. It feels dramatically weak. And I kind of like saying that. I want to say that to myself of Kevin, pony up, man up, whatever you want to say, and be confident enough to be. That's what your book comes across. It comes across as, you're a confident guy, but humble. And that's why you're here. That's what gives me, at the end of it, that's what gives me trust in you. Is there anything greater than that at the end of it?
Right. And, I thought about that chapter a lot, because if you watch so much of our online discourse or on television, people behave in a way that just confirms what other people are most worried about them, right? I mentioned earlier that we tend to strut around thinking that anyone who disagrees with us must just be a fool or a monster.
Yeah.
And then when we, in our discourse, behave like a fool or a monster, all we're doing is just confirming that these assumptions they're making, right? I share the story in the book of this guy on Facebook arguing with someone over immigration policy. And he's just like, you must be an idiot. How could you possibly believe this? And I'm sitting there thinking, she's not going to think that you're giving her information that's going to change her mind. She's going to think you're a monster. Yeah. And so if
she's not going to go, oh my gosh, thanks for pointing that out. I totally changed my mind.
Yeah, you're right. I am an idiot. That's not going to change. So this person would have been far better off of engaging in the various habits, asking questions, trying to understand how she reached her views. And then eventually she would be open to him saying, have you ever considered like this statistic? Or have you ever considered this other concern? Or even saying, if he were to say something like, I share your worry, but I'm also worried about this other thing. And getting her to think about it that way, right? And so again and again and again, if we behave in the way that people assume we're going to behave, it's just feeding their fears, and we're never going to make progress. Now, I think I already said this, but I'll emphasize it again. We all have certain topics that we have a hard time with, that it's very difficult for us. And so what I encourage folks to do is, one aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy that's been proven to work is, if there's something that causes you anxiety or an emotional spike, or, it's your triggering thing, is to expose yourself to it in small doses until it no longer causes the anxiety. So we see this all the time with kids and others. You expose them to them in healthy doses. It's not gonna kill them, but you expose them to things in healthy doses until they can handle it. If you're afraid of public speaking, do short instances of public speaking in small doses till you get comfortable, right? So if there are topics that cause you to behave your worst because they trigger you, the key then is in healthy environments. Perhaps it needs to be with a professional therapist. Perhaps it needs to be reading books by yourself, but expose yourself to the ideas and people who disagree with you in small doses that are healthy for you to handle, until you can get to the point that when somebody brings it up on a podcast or at dinner or wherever, it's not triggering to you anymore. You've heard the arguments, you're aware of them, you've thought about them, and then you can talk about them in a healthy way, and you won't behave in your, kind of the worst form of yourself.
The triggered and provoked. And on that, I don't know exactly when this show is going to publish and when another show will have published, but I just had a conversation that we are producing with a guy named Cardin Rabin, and he talks about the emotional cold plunge, and to get to the emotions and to treat it like a cold plunge of just sitting in there and realizing this isn't going to kill me, and becoming, kind of increasing your comfort level with it. There's two more points I want to hit on. I mean, there's actually probably 25, but that would be an all-day show. One of them, and this is actually, I think this is also in Habit 4. You say peacemakers are highly intelligent. And of course, who doesn't want to align themselves with that? Okay, I want to be a peacemaker and think of myself as highly intelligent. What it came to mind, though, was a quote, and I didn't even know who said it. Turned out it was Jordan Peterson, but he said, a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. It reminded me of that when you said peacemakers are highly intelligent. I mean, you are. If we're going to talk about the First Amendment, even as you profess that maybe you only know 5%, but you're an expert. And if I'm going to talk to you about that, you could probably push me in a way that would be very difficult for me to debate. But you're probably not going to do it in a way that is disrespectful. You are going to have it under voluntary control, even your area of expertise. Maybe it depends on the motive. Is the motive to win, or is it to remain in relationship or connection with me? Fair.
And I don't know exactly. I don't have every word of my book memorized. If I said peacemakers are highly intelligent, what I should have said was peacemakers are often highly intelligent, because I think the point I was probably trying to make there, in other words, you don't have to be some kind of a genius or whatever. Yeah. My point was, we sometimes attribute people who are incredibly argumentative and always making points and always doing these mic drop moments with intelligence. But the reality is, oftentimes peacemakers are often some of the most intelligent people in the room, but they're choosing not to use their intelligence just to win arguments.
Yeah.
They're choosing to use their intelligence to make progress. And so it would be a mistake to accuse someone who chooses not to just argue with everyone of being not intelligent. That would be a mistake. The reality is, sometimes the most intelligent people in the room are the ones who know how to communicate well and do it productively, right?
Well, I'll do it justice, because I've had people do it to me also, doing shows together, talk about my book, and I don't really remember what I wrote. Here it is. Because it was really important to me. You said many peacemakers, not all, are incredibly intelligent. This means they are the kind of people who could, if they wanted, enjoy a mic drop, putting people in their place, or a burn moment every once in a while. They could, but they choose not to do so. They know that expressing ideas with kindness and love is more effective than using sarcasm and anger. Beautiful. Yeah. There you go. Well, this, again, man, there's so many good points, but Steve, one that I just so appreciated was Habit 8, a sliver of humor. That one is one that I can tend to be fairly serious and sometimes intense with things. And I'm striving for that more, to hold something lightly. It's probably not, it's generally not the end of the world. And I don't need to take myself or the topic so seriously. And I know I struggle with, and maybe some others do too, with the kind of the Superman complex, and to come back and not hold it, and to hold it lightly for myself and for others. And I thought of that it made me think of movies. What do we have in there? We call it comic relief.
Right.
In that very tense, very acute, and a life-threatening moment in the adventure movie that we're watching, that somebody says something that's kind of funny, and we love that. And that should be kind of hey, there's the flag that it's meaningful and valuable. And so I was really just stoked to see that's actually a chapter or a segment, in your book, to have a sliver of humor. I thought it was brilliant. I loved your story about Ronald Reagan back in the day, talking about age with Mondale. It was awesome.
Yeah, right. And I can't even do it justice. If your listeners aren't aware of it, Google Reagan, Mondale, and age, and it'll come up first thing. And it's one of probably the best, most humorous moments in political history. But yeah, using humor to put people at ease, to let them know you're a decent person, to find common connection. I see this again and again and again. And I was at a conference a while back where they were trying to promote dialogue on a particular issue where people were really disagreed with each other. And I watched this moderator get up to start the conversation. The audience all had mixed views. You had different people with different views on this panel. And she started off with just a self-deprecating joke, and everybody laughed. And it just lightened the mood. It made the conversation so much more possible, right? So the key, of course, now, and I talk about this in the book, is understanding the type of humor that you react to, understanding the type of humor that people with whom you're discoursing, react to. What do they think is funny? Finding ways to connect with them and bond with them. You can make great progress with somebody. If you know they like a particular TV show, every once in a while you send them a little link related to the show or a quote from it, and you just start to build these bonds with somebody, and then that allows you to start having healthy conversations with them. I also emphasize when not to use humor, right? I talk about, you mentioned abortion, and I talk about, most people don't know this, but like the worst moment in legal humor history is that oral argument for Roe v. Wade. The lawyer gets up for the state and he tries to make a joke. And here you have like one of the weightiest cases in the history of the United States. And he tries to make a joke at the beginning, and he's met with just dead silence from the justices.
I read that. It was terrible.
Yeah. And you're thinking to yourself, man, this is not the place to be making jokes. Just get up and make the best argument you can, sit back down. Right. So part of using humor is knowing when not to use humor, right? And
I did think of I think it was an old Saturday Night Live skit where the guy starts, he's like the caveman lawyer, and he comes at everything with just, well, I'm just a caveman, but, and then he, it says this thing. And I love that, even that, taking the pressure off of, hey, that I want to do that. Hey, I'm just like, if my kid, I'm just your dad, but here's my perspective, and has some there. I mean, ultimately, Steve, it just brings me back to this of going again, back to motive, which is a big part of what drives you, what the show is called, is right now in this moment with this topic, am I here to just win? Right. At all costs, like a high paid lawyer? Am I here to win, or am I here to connect? Speaking to my kids, I'm going to be with a bunch of my older kids this weekend. Is a topic going to come up? Am I there to win, or am I there to have connection with them? Doesn't mean I just acquiesce and forfeit my own values and thoughts, whatever, but, and I don't want to win. What am I going to, again, am I going to come on Facebook and say something and everybody's going to go, oh my gosh, changed my life. Thanks for what you said and how you criticized me. Am I there to win, or am I there to connect?
Well, and sometimes maybe you do need to win, right? Like if you're a father and you've made a rule for your children and you've got to stick with that, that's great. But a lot of these things we argue about, we're trying to win arguments on topics that we have absolutely no power over, right? Like if you and I were to get into a fight right now over what the United States should do with regards to Israel and Hamas, you and I could argue for 4 hours about that. We have zero power to do anything about it. Like, our opinions are not going to change what the United States is going to do with respect to Israel and Hamas. So we're going to be arguing over something, trying to win an argument for which there's really no way you or I actually can win, right? So why do that? Why not instead shift the topic to, why don't we understand this better? Let's look into the history of it more. Why don't we explore more what the U.S. is actually doing right now versus what, there's a million questions you and I could explore together. That's how you connect. That's how you make progress on the conversation, instead of just arguing, trying to win. So I love that. I think that's so great about this idea of what is your motivation here?
Yeah. And I like that. What are the stakes? Because if we're sitting there talking about the Middle East, we're increasing our anxiety. We're probably hurting our relationship, and I'm probably just increasing my own misinformation. It's just a lose on all sides.
That's right. Yeah. And you're not going to make a difference of what actually happens on the world stage. So better to just find ways to become more informed and, explore it better.
And I just thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for taking the time out, from your craft to write this book and to come on the show when you're not. Well, hopefully the discussion helps you even understand more about what you're interested in, and we'll continue to benefit from that. I mean, I look at it as a manual. It's so strong, and I'm going to be talking about it continually with my audience, with my family, with my friends. So thank you for letting me be a student.
Well, and thanks this is just a fantastic interview. I mean, you've really got me thinking about it and forced me to go deep, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your taking the time to explore the book to really go deep on it. So thanks.
Totally, so much. My honor. We'll get on. We'll do what we can on that 100,000 copies.
There you go. I always tell people, there's only so much publishers and authors can do to actually get the book out, and then after that, a book only does well if people start sharing it with their friends, right? So I just tell people, share it with your friends. Tell your people about it.
Share it with your friends. Somebody tell Oprah. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Steve, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Friends, thanks for joining us on this drive. Again, that's Stephen T. Collis. and his new book, which is just one I want to keep studying, and I want to share it with others so that we have this common context in which to dialogue productively with each other. The book's called Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Got a question for myself or Stephen? Let me know. Go to kevinmiller.co. I hope this episode helps you drive further, and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Yeah.